At my wedding reception, in front of 300 guests, my husband took the microphone and announced that he was giving every dollar he owned to his mother. His 2 condos, his savings, his investment accounts, all of it signed over to the woman sitting in the front row, dabbing her eyes like she'd just been handed the moon. And then, because apparently that wasn't enough, he announced that starting the very next month, he'd be sending her $6,000 every month for the rest of her life, out of the income that was supposed to build our life, the life we just promised each other an hour earlier at the altar in front of everyone we loved. The whole banquet hall melted. People stood up. They clapped. Older relatives wiped away tears and called him a real man, a devoted son, the kind of boy you just don't see anymore. A man at the back actually shouted that his own children should be taking notes. I stood beside him in my wedding dress, holding my bouquet, smiling the way a bride is supposed to smile, while her new husband is applauded for quietly setting fire to her future. And then he turned to me, held out the microphone, and asked me, in front of all 300 of them, to tell everyone how proud I was of him. So I took it. I looked out at 300 faces waiting for me to cry grateful little tears. I looked at my parents, frozen at their table. I looked at his mother's triumphant, expectant smile. And I lifted that microphone to my lips and I said one sentence. One sentence, and the entire room went from cheering to so silent you could hear the ice settling in the champagne buckets. My mother told me later she actually heard a fork drop 2 tables away. I'll tell you exactly what I said, but to understand why it landed like a bomb, and why, 6 weeks later, 3 people would lose everything they thought they'd just won that night, I have to take you back to the beginning, to before the dress, before the lie, before I understood the single most important thing I know now. The most dangerous thing a woman can possibly be is quietly, patiently paying attention. Before we go any further, I want to ask you something, and I'll ask you again at the end, because I'm curious whether your answer changes once you know everything I knew. When a man humiliates his bride at their own wedding to please his mother, and she ends it on the spot in front of everyone, is she cold? Or did they hand her every reason? Tell me in the comments, and if you've ever been underestimated by someone who mistook your patience for weakness, type the word hush. Let's see how many of us are out there. Now, let me tell you exactly how I ended up holding that microphone. My name is Catherine Mercer. Everyone calls me Kate. I was 30 years old that spring, and I had spent the previous 8 years building something most people don't manage in a lifetime. A career I was genuinely proud of, and a small, stubborn nest egg I'd scraped together one disciplined paycheck at a time. I'm a marketing director. I run brand strategy for a mid-sized firm in the city, the kind of job where you spend your days managing impossible clients, diffusing crises before they explode, and reading people for a living. I'm good at it. I'm good at it precisely because I've learned to stay calm when everyone around me is losing their head, to listen more than I talk, and to never, ever show my whole hand until the deal is closed. Remember that about me. It matters later. I met Daniel Whitman 5 years before that wedding, at a friend's birthday dinner. He was charming in the easy, effortless way that some men are: warm, attentive, quick to laugh, quicker to make you feel like the most interesting person in the room. He pulled out chairs. He remembered the name of my favorite author. He texted goodnight. For a woman who had spent her 20s being the responsible one, the planner, the person everyone leaned on, Daniel felt like permission to finally lean on someone else. We dated for 4 years, and in those 4 years, I told myself a story about Daniel that I desperately wanted to be true. I told myself he was kind. I told myself he was a devoted son. I told myself that the way he dropped everything the instant his mother called, even at 2 in the morning, even in the middle of my own birthday dinner, was just evidence of what a loving man he'd be to his own family someday. I was a smart woman who'd built a career reading other people accurately, and I had a complete blind spot for the one person I'd decided to love. We always do. That's how it gets us. There were signs. There were so many signs. The way Daniel never made a decision, not a vacation, not a car, not a couch, without first running it past his mother. The way his voice changed when she called, going soft and small and boyish, a 32-year-old man shrinking back into a child. The way he'd cancel our plans without apology if a leaner. So much as mentioned she was feeling lonely. I called it devotion. I told my friends I admired it. Anna, my best friend, once asked me quietly, "Kate, are you marrying Daniel, or are you marrying his mother?" And I laughed her off. I actually got annoyed at her for asking. His mother, Eleanor Whitman. I should have understood Eleanor from the very first dinner. She was elegant in that expensive, frost-bitten way, every hair lacquered into place, every word chosen and weighted like a scalpel. Daniel's father had died when Daniel was young, and Eleanor had raised him alone, a fact she worked into conversation roughly every 9 minutes, the way some people mention the weather. "I gave up everything for my son," she'd say, smiling at me over the rim of her wine glass. "Everything. So you'll understand if I'm protective of who he chooses to spend his life with." I thought she was just a mother. A little intense, a little possessive, but fundamentally a mother who loved her boy. I didn't understand yet that she didn't see Daniel as her son. She saw him as her asset, her retirement plan, her status, her purpose, her possession, and she had spent 30 years making sure he never once learned the difference. To Eleanor, a wife wasn't a partner for her son. A wife was a competitor for control of him, and competitors get eliminated. Here's the part that became important. When Daniel and I got engaged, we did what couples do, we bought a home together. A beautiful condo, $900,000, the kind of place that felt like the beginning of a real life. The down payment was $180,000. And of that, my parents, my hardworking, deeply ordinary parents who had saved for decades, contributed $90,000. Half. They didn't have to, they wanted to. "It's an investment in your future, sweetheart," my father said, pressing the check into my hands. "In your home." We agreed, Daniel and I, that both our names would go on the deed after the wedding. That $90,000 of my family's life savings would be protected, woven into the foundation of the home we were building. I trusted him, that's the simplest way to say it. I trusted him the way you trust that the floor will hold when you step on it. You don't think about it, you just walk. And so I planned a wedding, 300 guests. A banquet hall downtown with crystal chandeliers and a string quartet. My mother cried picking out the flowers. My father practiced his walk down the aisle in the living room when he thought no one was watching. I had a fitting for a dress that made me feel, for the first time in my careful, controlled life, like something out of a dream. I was so happy. I want you to understand that. I wasn't a bitter woman looking for a reason to blow up her own life. I was a woman in love with the idea of the family I was about to build. I just didn't know that the family I was marrying into had already decided I would never be part of it. The wedding day was perfect, right up until it wasn't. The ceremony went off without a single flaw. I walked down the aisle on my father's arm. Daniel teared up at the altar, actual tears, which I would later understand were the easiest currency he ever spent. We exchanged vows. We exchanged rings. People threw petals. For about 90 minutes, I was the happiest I had ever been in my life. Then came the reception. The string quartet finished the last notes of the recessional. The MC stepped up to the small stage to begin the toasts, and he turned toward Daniel and me with the microphone, and Daniel stepped forward fast and took it out of his hand before the MC could even speak. "Before we begin," Daniel said, his voice ringing out across the hall, "I have something important to announce." The 300 guests went quiet. I stood beside him in my white dress, my bouquet in my hands, and I felt the first cold finger of unease touch the back of my neck. We hadn't discussed any announcement. This wasn't in the program. Daniel turned and looked at his mother in the front row. His whole face softened. "My father died when I was young," he said, "and my mother raised me alone. She sacrificed everything. Everything I am, I owe to her." Eleanor pressed a tissue to the corner of each eye, perfectly, like she'd rehearsed it, which I would later learn she had. "So today," Daniel said, his voice rising, On the most important day of my life, I want to honor her. I am officially announcing that all of my premarital assets, both of my condos, my entire investment portfolio, and my savings accounts, are being transferred in full as a gift to my mother. For one heartbeat, the room was silent, and then it erupted. People clapped, people stood. An older man at a back table shouted, "That's a good son. That's a real man." Women dabbed their eyes. The applause rolled across the hall in a warm, thunderous wave, and Alina rose from her seat with her, arms outstretched toward her boy, and Daniel walked over and embraced her under the spotlight, while 300 people cheered. I stood alone in the center of that stage in my wedding dress, and I felt the floor I had trusted my entire life quietly give way beneath me. It's a strange, specific feeling, being publicly destroyed while everyone around you celebrates. The room was loud with joy, and I was standing in the exact center of it, in white, in the spotlight, completely alone. My ears were ringing. I could feel my own pulse in my throat. The bouquet in my hands had gone slick where I was gripping it too hard. And the worst part, the part I'll never forget, was that not one of those 300 clapping people had any idea they were applauding a robbery. To them, it was the most beautiful thing they'd ever seen, a son honoring his mother. They were moved. But he wasn't finished. Daniel raised a hand for quiet, came back to the microphone, and added, "And that's not all. Starting next month, I'll be transferring $6,000 to my mother, every single month, for her living expenses. It's the least I can do for the woman who gave me everything." The applause somehow got louder. $6,000 a month. I did the math without meaning to, my marketing brain doing what it always does, even while the rest of me was in free fall. Daniel made around $15,000 a month, $6,000 to his mother, $7,000, give or take, to the mortgage on the home we'd just bought, which left the two of us, a newly married couple, a couple who talked about children, about a future, about a life, with roughly $2,000 a month to build all of it on. While my family's $90,000 sat folded into a home I might now never have a real claim to. I want you to understand what that announcement actually was, underneath the tears and the applause. It wasn't generosity. It was a transfer of power. In a single 90-second speech, Daniel had moved every asset he owned beyond my reach, committed nearly half his income to his mother for life, and done it so publicly that objecting would make me look like the monster. He'd built a cage and decorated it with rose petals. And then Daniel turned to me, beaming, completely certain of what was about to happen, and held out the microphone. "Kate," he said warmly, "come tell everyone how proud you are. You always said the thing you loved most about me was how I take care of my family." 300 faces turned toward me. I saw my mother at her table, her hand frozen halfway to her mouth, her face gone white. I saw my father half rising from his chair, my mother's hand on his arm holding him back. I saw my best friend Anna, my maid of honor, staring at me with her eyes huge and her jaw tight. And I saw Alina. She had stopped crying. She was watching me now with a small, expectant, satisfied smile, the smile of a woman who had set a trap and was waiting to watch it close. That smile is the thing I remember most. Because in that instant, I understood something that should have terrified me, and instead made me very, very calm. This wasn't an accident. Daniel hadn't gotten swept up in a moment of sentiment. This had been planned. And the plan only worked if I did exactly what they expected, smiled, swallowed it, and clapped along like a good little bride who knew her place. So I took the microphone. People expect a betrayed bride to cry, to run, to make a scene that's all noise and no aim. I didn't feel like crying. That's the strange part. I stood on that stage and waited for the heartbreak to come, the way you brace for a wave, and it didn't come. Something else came instead, something colder and far more useful. Clarity. For 4 years, I'd been carrying a quiet, constant effort I hadn't even known the weight of, the work of being the kind of woman Alina might one day approve of, the work of believing Daniel's loyalty to his mother was a virtue instead of a leash. And standing there, with the microphone warm in my hand and the applause still ringing, that weight simply lifted. Because there was nothing left to earn. There was nothing to save. I want to be honest with you about what went through my mind, because it wasn't rage. Rage is loud and clumsy, and it makes you do things that feel good for 10 seconds and cost you for 10 years. What I felt was the opposite of that. It was the focus I get right before I close a deal. The cool, clean certainty of a woman who has just understood the board completely. Every piece, every player, every move. I understood that they expected me to be small. I understood that the entire performance, the announcement, the rehearsed tears, the timing, handing me the microphone last of all, was designed to corner me into agreeing in public, so that I could never object in private. A bride who smiles and claps at her husband's generosity can't very well file a complaint about tea the next morning. They had built a stage to make my silence look like consent and my consent look like love. They had handed me a microphone and 300 witnesses. That was their mistake. Because here is the thing Alina never bothered to learn about me, the thing Daniel had forgotten in 4 years of letting his mother run his life. I am very good at exactly one thing above all others. I know how to read a room. And I know how to use one. I do it for a living. I have stood in front of hostile boardrooms and turned them, with nothing but the right words in the right order at the right moment. Alina had spent months planning a performance, and then handed the microphone to the one person in that room who was a professional at exactly this. She thought she was watching a trap close on me. She had no idea she just walked into mine. I smiled, not a bride's smile. A real one, the first real smile I'd felt all day, because for the first time since Daniel had taken that microphone, I knew precisely what I was going to do, and it had nothing to do with crying. I let the silence stretch one extra second, the way you do when you want a room to lean in. 300 people leaned in, expecting gratitude. And I gave them the truth instead. I'll tell you what I said into that microphone in a moment, because what I said is only half the story. What I did after I said it is the half that actually won. That night, after I had walked out of my own wedding with my parents and my best friend Anna, after I had peeled off the dress and left it in a heap like a deflated white ghost, I sat at my kitchen table, and I did not fall apart. I made a list. It's what I do. When my world is on fire, I don't scream at the flames. I inventory what's flammable, what's salvageable, and where the exits are. And the very first thing on my list was a name, Michael Vance. Michael is an attorney, a sharp, unsentimental man a friend had recommended to me years earlier for a contract dispute, the kind of lawyer who doesn't waste a word and never tells you what you want to hear instead of what's true. I called his office first thing the next morning, and because the universe occasionally shows mercy, he agreed to see me that same afternoon. I sat across from him in his downtown office and laid it all out, flat and unemotional, the way I'd present a quarterly report. The wedding, the announcement, the $90,000 of my parents' money in the down payment, the deed that was supposed to carry both our names and didn't yet, the $6,000 a month pledge to his mother. Michael listened without interrupting. When I finished, he took off his glasses, cleaned them slowly on a cloth from his desk drawer, and put them back on. "All right," he said. "First, did you sign the marriage license at the county clerk's office?" "No," I said. "We were going to do it Monday, after the honeymoon." Something flickered behind his eyes. "Then legally, Catherine, you are not married. You had a ceremony. You did not file. In the eyes of the law, this is a broken engagement, not a divorce." He let that sit. "That is enormously in your favor. It makes everything cleaner and faster." "And the $90,000. Your parents' contribution to a home purchased in contemplation of a marriage that did not legally occur," he said. "That is a conditional gift. The condition, the marriage, was not met. You have every right to demand it back in full. With the bank records and the texts agreeing to put both names on the deed, this isn't even a difficult case." I felt the first piece of the floor reform under my feet. "Here is what I want you to understand, though," Michael went on, leaning forward. "People in your position want to fight loud. They want to scream, post, confront, humiliate. Don't. A man like the one you're describing, and especially a mother like the one you're describing, they will turn any outburst into proof that you're hysterical, unstable, the villain who ruined a devoted son's wedding. They are very good at being the victim. Don't give them the script they're hoping for. Then what do I do? You do what you apparently already did at that wedding, he said, and for the first time almost smiled. You stay calm and you make a record. We send a formal demand letter for the $90,000 certified to his workplace where it carries weight. Meanwhile, you document everything. Every threat, every contact, every message with a date attached. You don't react, you collect. And when they overreach, and people like this always overreach, you'll have the receipts and they'll have a tantrum. One of those wins in the real world. It isn't the tantrum. I wrote one word at the top of my notepad: hush. Stay quiet, gather everything. And underneath it, I wrote a second word, because I already knew how this ended, knew it the way I'd known it the second Alina smiled at me from that front row. Tell. There would be a time to be silent. And then there would be a time to put every single thing I'd gathered in front of the people who needed to see it, all at once, where no amount of fake tears could spin it. That was the whole plan: hush, then tell. Anna, my best friend and maid of honor, became my second set of hands and eyes. Whatever you need, she said. I was standing right there, I'm a witness. And Kate, I never trusted that woman for a second. What I didn't know yet, sitting in that office with my one-word plan and my calm, capable lawyer, was just how far Alina Whitman had already gone. The wedding wasn't her opening move. It was nearly her last one, and I was about to find the proof. Here's what I need you to understand about the 6 weeks that followed. I was never frantic, not once. I treated the wreckage of my wedding the way I'd treat a hostile client account, calmly, methodically, building a file one fact at a time. Michael, my lawyer, had given me 2 rules: don't react, collect. So I collected. And the more I collected, the worse it got. Every time I thought I'd found the bottom, the floor opened up again. The first thing I uncovered was where my parents' money had actually gone. Michael sent the demand letter, certified, to Daniel's workplace, exactly as he'd advised, because a legal letter that lands on a man's desk in front of his colleagues carries a kind of weight a text message never will. Within 2 days, Daniel was calling me from numbers I didn't recognize because I'd blocked his. Kate, I don't have the 90,000, he admitted, his voice already frayed. It's not, I can't just get it. Why not? I asked. It's a down payment on a home, it's right there in the equity. A long pause, and then the truth slipped out of him, the way the truth does when a weak man is cornered. My mom moved it, after the engagement. She said it was safer in her accounts. She put it into CDs and some other things. I can't just pull it out. There it was, reveal number 1. The $90,000 my parents had saved over a lifetime, money that was supposed to be the foundation of my home, had been quietly funneled into Alina's personal accounts before the wedding had even happened. They hadn't waited until after the ceremony to start stripping me. They'd started before I ever walked down the aisle. I wrote it down. Date, time, his exact words. I didn't yell. I said, "You have 1 week, Daniel," and I hung up. The second reveal was who Daniel really was without the suit and the charm. He started showing up. At my office, of all places, the one arena where I am untouchable, where I am respected, where I am good. He came through the lobby in a wrinkled suit, unshaven, and made a scene at the reception desk loud enough that half my floor heard it. "You sent a lawyer's letter to my work. Do you know how that made me look? You're ruining my life." I came out, calm as still water, with my colleagues watching. "This is my workplace. If you'd return my parents' money, there'd be no letter. Please leave." He grabbed my wrist, hard enough that I felt it for a day, and that was the moment the last of the man I thought I'd loved evaporated completely. I called security. 2 guards walked him out while he shouted that I'd regret this. My project manager, a sharp woman named Helen, put a hand on my shoulder afterward and said quietly, "Be careful, Kate. Men like that get worse before they get gone." She had no idea how right she was, because Daniel was the weak one. I hadn't even met the real opponent yet. The third reveal was Alina's first open move, and it was a declaration of war. 2 days after the workplace scene, my best friend Anna called me, breathless. "Kate, Dave's mother. She wrote a post. It's everywhere." Eleanor had gone online. A long, weeping, beautifully manipulative wall of text, posted to every group and page she belonged to, painting me as a gold-digging fraud who had toyed with her precious son's heart, thrown a vile tantrum at the wedding, and was now extorting $90,000 from a grieving widow. She'd attached photos of me. Within hours, it had been shared hundreds of times. The comments were a pylon: gold digger, heartless, poor Daniel, poor mother. I sat at my desk and read it, and I felt the cold thing in my chest sharpen into something with an edge. Most people in that moment would have fired back, posted their own emotional rebuttal, started fighting in the comments. That's exactly what Eleanor wanted, for me to descend into a screaming match where the truth drowns in noise and everyone just sees two hysterical women. I called Michael. She's defaming me publicly, I said. I want her to respond, but I want to do it right. Then don't respond with feelings, he said. Respond with evidence. Screenshot everything she posted and every cruel comment. Then we build the real story, fact by fact, with the bank records. And the wedding video, and we put it out once, cleanly, on your own page under your real name. The truth doesn't need to shout. It just needs receipts. So I did. I spent 2 hours assembling it, not a rant, a case. The bank transfers showing my parents $90,000. The texts where Daniel agreed both names would go on the deed. Short video clips of the wedding announcement that friends had filmed. A clear, dry, devastating timeline, and I posted it. The fourth reveal was how fast a built-on lie's reputation collapses when the truth arrives. Public opinion didn't just shift, it snapped. Within an hour, my post had been shared more than Eleanor's. The comments that had been calling me a gold digger turned on a dime. He gave all his money to his mommy at the wedding? $6,000 a month? Run, girl. The original poster is the actual villain here. Anna shared it first as a sworn witness who'd stood 3 feet away. Then colleagues. Then other wedding guests, confirming every detail. And then it reached Daniel's employer. Because here's what entitled people forget. A man who melts down at his ex-fiancee's workplace, whose mother is publicly accused of funneling a family's savings, becomes a liability. His firm issued a quiet statement and suspended him pending resolution of his personal matters. The director position he'd spent 8 years climbing toward gone, or close to it. He called me sobbing. "Are you happy? They suspended me." I said very calmly, "Those are the consequences of your own choices, Daniel," and I hung up. I felt no joy. I want you to understand that. I felt the grim, level satisfaction of a woman watching a structure collapse exactly along the cracks its builders had made. And then came the fifth reveal, the one that turned everything from a breakup into a conspiracy. A package arrived at my door. No sender name. Inside, a USB drive and a note in shaky handwriting. "Kate, there are things you need to know. A week before the wedding, my mom met with someone. I found this recording. Listen to it. I'm sorry for everything. D." Daniel, trying too late and too cowardly to do one honest thing. I plugged it in, one audio file, 5 minutes long. Eleanor's voice, unmistakable, talking to a younger woman. My Daniel's lost his head over this, Kate. But I see right through her. She's only after our money. I want you to be his wife. You're modest, obedient, from a good family. The younger woman, but he loves her, Mrs. Whitman. Love, you can't live on love. And then Eleanor laid it out, calm as anything. Their wedding is next Saturday. Daniel is going to announce he's transferring everything to me. Kate won't stand for it. She'll make a scene, the wedding will fall apart, and then you step in. I sat frozen in front of my laptop. The entire wedding, the announcement, the public humiliation, the timing, the microphone, none of it was Daniel getting carried away. It had been scripted. Eleanor had engineered the exact catastrophe that unfolded, designed to break me publicly so I'd run, leaving the path clear. Daniel was a pawn. I had been cast in a role in someone else's play, and the role was the woman who ruins everything and disappears. The cold thing in my chest went very, very still. The sixth reveal was who the other woman was, and what Eleanor had promised her. The younger voice on the recording had a name attached to it now because Daniel's note had named her, Vanessa Cole, Eleanor's hand-picked replacement bride. a woman Alina had been quietly grooming for months, even while I was choosing flowers and trying on dresses. On the recording, Alina told her exactly how to seal it. Once the wedding falls apart, you take the initiative, you get pregnant, and where is he going to go? He'll have to marry you. Get pregnant as a tactic, a strategy to trap a grown man into a marriage his own mother had arranged. I'd been worried I was dealing with a heartbroken family. I was actually dealing with something closer to a hostage operation. And then the seventh reveal, the worst one, arrived in the form of Vanessa Cole herself. 3 weeks later, a text from an unknown number. "Catherine, this is Vanessa, Daniel's fiancée. Can we meet? There are things you should know." Curiosity 1. We met at a quiet cafe. She was younger than me, pretty, nervous, picking at her fingers, and visibly, obviously frightened. And what she told me, hands shaking around a cup of tea she never drank, was the detonator for everything that came next. "I'm not really pregnant," she said. "Alina coached me to fake it. She said if I pretended, Daniel would marry me for sure. The scene at your wedding, that was her too. She just wanted you gone." Her eyes filled. "And now I'm scared, Kate. Daniel's drinking. He lost his job. Alina already made him sign his second condo over to her for protection. He has nothing left, and she told me that once we're married, if I don't PR. Oju's a real baby, she'll handle it. She said it doesn't matter how, as long as the child carries the family name." I looked at this terrified young woman who'd thought she was taking a shortcut to a comfortable life and had instead walked through the front door of a nightmare. And I understood, finally, the full shape of what I was up against. Alina didn't lose. Alina didn't apologize. Alina escalated. "She blames you for all of it," Vanessa whispered. "I overheard her on the phone. She said you have to pay. She said it's not over." She was right, it wasn't over. But Alina had made one fatal miscalculation. She thought she was hunting a heartbroken girl who would eventually break. She had no idea she'd spent 6 weeks handing a calm, patient professional every single piece of rope she'd need. The bank records, the defamation post, the workplace footage, the recording, and now a defecting witness sitting across from me, willing to tell the truth. I'd promised myself I would hush and gather until it couldn't be argued. It could no longer be argued. It was almost time to tell. I want to go back now to the microphone. To the one sentence I promised you at the very beginning, the sentence that turned 300 cheering people into a silence so total you could hear a fork drop 2 tables away. Because that sentence is where the trap really began. Standing on that stage in my wedding dress, with Daniel beaming and Alina smiling her satisfied little smile, and 300 guests waiting for grateful tears, I raised the microphone and I said, "Respecting your mother is a virtue. Handing her your spine is not. The wedding is off, and so is everything you thought you were getting." For 3 full seconds, nobody moved. And then the hall didn't erupt in applause. It erupted in chaos. I set the microphone down on the podium with a soft, final click. I took off my veil in front of all of them. I slid the engagement ring off my finger, the one Daniel had saved 6 months for, the one that had once made me cry, and I pressed it back into his hand. And then I turned to the room and said, perfectly calm, "I'm so sorry you had to witness this. The banquet is paid for. Please stay and enjoy yourselves." And I walked off that stage, took my parents by the hand, and left. That was the hush. The decision, made in public, to stop performing, and then to go quiet and start building. I want to tell you what that walk out of the banquet hall actually felt like, because people imagine it as triumphant, and it wasn't. It was the longest walk of my life. 300 people staring. My mother sobbing into my father's shoulder. The string quartet sitting frozen with their bows in the air, unsure whether to play. Anna running to catch up with me, kicking off her heels to do it. Behind me, I could hear Alina's voice rising into a shriek. "She's insane. She humiliated my son." Already rewriting the story, already casting herself as the wounded party. I didn't turn around. I'd learned, in one afternoon, that turning around to defend yourself to people committed to misunderstanding you is just a way of bleeding out slower. In the car, my father gripped the wheel and asked, very quietly, "Sweetheart, are you sure?" And I said, "I'm sure, Dad. I just didn't jump into a fire pit and I'm not going to apologize for stepping back from the edge. What followed over those 6 weeks was everything I told you about. The demand letter, the funneled 90,000, Daniel's meltdown at my office, Aliner's defamation campaign, my evidence post that flipped the city, his suspension, the recording, Vanessa's confession. Piece by piece, I'd been assembling a file that could not be argued with. Bank records, texts, the wedding video, screenshots of Aliner's lies and every cruel comment beneath them. The 5-minute audio of Aliner scripting my humiliation and ordering a fake pregnancy. And now, a defecting witness willing to swear to all of it. Michael, my lawyer, laid it out on his desk and looked at it for a long moment. "Catherine," he said, "in 22 years, I have rarely seen a file this clean. You didn't gather evidence. You built a wall. Now, how do you want to use it?" I told him I didn't think I'd have to use it the way most people would, chasing the other side into a courtroom, dragging it out for years. Because of who Aliner was. "Explain," he said. "She can't help herself," I said. "She doesn't experience losing as a reason to stop. She experiences it as a reason to push harder. If I stay quiet, she won't read it as strength. She'll read it as me cracking, as proof that one more shove will finish me off. She's going to come at me again, somewhere public, somewhere she thinks will break me. And when she does, she'll do it in front of an audience and a camera, because humiliating me privately was never the point. The point was always the show." Michael studied me for a moment. Hen almost smiled. "So you don't set the trap," he said. "You just make sure you're ready to spring it when she builds it herself." "Exactly," I said. And here is the thing about Aliner Whitman that I had finally, completely understood. She would never stop. People like Aliner read patience as weakness and silence as surrender. She would not quietly accept that the money had to be returned and the engagement was dead. She'd convince herself that if she just applied enough pressure, the gold-digging girl would finally fold. So I didn't have to chase her into a public reckoning. I just had to be ready when she walked into one. Michael drafted everything. A formal demand, backed by the bank trail, for the full 90,000. A defamation claim against Aliner, signed and ready to file the instant I gave the word. And we made copies of the recording, encrypted, backed up, in 3 separate places, because a recording like that is only a weapon if it survives the person who wants it to disappear. Vanessa, terrified but resolved, agreed to one thing: if it ever came down to it, she would tell the truth. Out loud, in front of whoever needed to hear it. I didn't know exactly when Aliner would make her move. I only knew that when she did, I would be the calmest person in the room, because I'd already seen the ending. I'd been holding it for 6 weeks. All Aliner had to do was show up. And 3 days later, at the one place she thought would humiliate me most, she did. It was a Friday afternoon. I just stepped out of a meeting when Helen, my old project manager, called me, her voice tight with alarm. "Kate, your ex's mother is downstairs, outside the building, and she's not alone." "How not alone?" "She's got a whole group with her, relatives. And Kate, she brought people with cameras, big cameras. She's got a banner. Security won't let them in the lobby, so they set up right on the sidewalk out front. There's a crowd gathering. She's got a megaphone." A megaphone, of course she did. I want you to picture Aliner's plan, because in her mind it was brilliant. Show up at my workplace, the place where my reputation actually mattered, with a mob of weeping relatives, a banner accusing me of fraud, and a couple of cheap independent journalists with cameras, and broadcast my supposed crimes to my colleagues and the whole street. Make me a public spectacle. Force me to either hide, which looks like guilt, or come out and scream, which looks like hysteria. Either way, she wins. Either way, the gold digger is exposed. It was a good plan, for an opponent who panics. Here is what Aliner was thinking as she stood on that sidewalk. I pieced it together later from Vanessa, from relatives who eventually talked. In Aliner's mind, this was the masterstroke. She had spent 6 weeks watching her world come apart. Her son suspended, her name turning sour, the money clawed back into the light. And she had decided, with the absolute certainty of a person who has never once been told no, that the problem was simply that she hadn't hit me hard enough yet. One more blow. One big, public, humiliating blow, somewhere that mattered to me, and the gold digger would finally crumble and run, and the story would reset to the version where Alina was the grieving, wronged mother. She genuinely believed she was about to win. She had dressed for it, her best suit, her hair perfect. She thought she was arriving at her vindication. She had no idea she was arriving at her execution, and she'd built the gallows herself. I told Helen to film everything from the window. I called Michael, "It's happening, the workplace now," and he said, "I'm on my way. Do not touch anyone, do not raise your voice. Record. If they assault you, call the police immediately. Let her perform, then play the file." I called Vanessa. She answered on the first ring, and after a long, shaking breath, she said, "I'll come. I'm done being afraid of her." And then I went downstairs, calm, unhurried, in a charcoal suit because I read rooms for a living and I know what armor looks like. I took the elevator down alone, and I remember watching my own reflection in the polished steel doors, steady, composed, a little pale, eyes clear. I thought, 6 weeks ago you walked off a stage in a wedding dress. Look at you now. The scene on the sidewalk was exactly as advertised. Alina stood at the center of a knot of relatives holding a banner, CATHERINE Mercer, marriage fraud, give my son back his good name, and she was weeping into a megaphone for the gathering crowd. This woman played with my son's heart. She extorted $90,000 from us. She destroyed his career. Where is she? Where is the woman who ruined my family? Pedestrians had stopped to film on their phones. The two men with the big cameras circled her, drinking it in. I walked straight up to the front of the crowd, and I said, clearly, without a trace of heat, "Alina." Or, "I'm right here. You were looking for me." The crowd parted. Every phone swung toward me. Alina froze for half a second. She hadn't expected me to come out, and then her face twisted and the megaphone came back up. "There she is, the predator. She stole from us, and she has the nerve to show her face." "You say I stole $90,000, I said, and I didn't need a megaphone because the street had already gone quiet to listen. That $90,000 was my parents' life savings, given as a down payment on a home. I have the bank transfers. I have them on my phone right now. Would you like me to show these nice people with the cameras the actual records? Or should I show them the part where your son admitted you moved that money into your own accounts before the wedding?" Alina's mouth opened and closed. "And you," I said, turning slightly toward the two men with cameras, my voice pleasant, "which outlet are you with? Can I see your press credentials?" "No, you're independent. Wonderful, what are your channel names? I'd love to subscribe and watch how you cover a story you only heard one side of, because that's called defamation, and I will name every person who participates in it in the lawsuit my attorney is filing this week." The cameras lowered. The two men suddenly found the sidewalk very interesting. "She's bluffing," Alina shrieked. "Don't listen to her, she faked everything." "Did I?" I said, and I took out my phone and I turned the volume all the way up. And I played the recording. Alina's own voice rolled out across that sidewalk, crisp and unmistakable, for the crowd, for the cameras, for everyone. "Their wedding is next Saturday. Daniel is going to announce he's transferring everything to me. Kate won't stand for it. She'll make a scene, the wedding will fall apart, and then you step in, you get pregnant, and where is he going to go? He'll have to marry you." The sidewalk went absolutely silent, and then it began to murmur, and the murmur rose into something ugly and astonished. "Oh my God, she planned the whole thing. The mother set it up. That's her own voice." I watched it happen to Alina in real time, and I will remember it for the rest of my life. For 6 weeks, that woman had worn the same expression no matter what came at her. A serene, untouchable certainty, the look of someone who has never genuinely believed she could lose. And I watched that expression break. I watched her hear her own voice come out of my phone and understand, in stages, what it meant. First confusion, where did that come from? Then recognition, that's me, that's my voice. Then the dawning horror as she scanned the faces around her and saw them turning, one by one, watching the grieving mother dissolve into the architect, live, on a public street, with cameras running. She had spent 30 years controlling exactly how the world saw her. And in the space of 5 recorded minutes, she lost control of it completely and forever, and she knew it, and there was absolutely nothing she could do but stand there and feel it happen. The megaphone hung from her hand, forgotten. Her mouth moved without sound. Alina went the color of paper. That's fake. She faked my voice. That's a crime. A forensic analyst can confirm in an afternoon whether it's faked, I said. Shall we let them? And while we're at it, I raised my voice just slightly, just enough. Vanessa, would you tell everyone whether you're actually pregnant? The crowd turned, because there at the edge of it stood Vanessa Cole, pale, trembling but standing. I'm not pregnant, she said, and her voice cracked and then steadied. Alina Whitman told me to fake it, to trap Daniel into marrying me. And the scene at the wedding, she planned that too, to get rid of Kate. All of it. Everything Kate said is true. That was the moment Alina's entire kingdom came down. The relatives holding the banner let go of it like it had caught fire. The journalists were already packing their cameras and backing away. The crowd had turned completely, not on me, but on the elegant woman with the megaphone who had just been exposed, in her own voice, on a public street, as the architect of all of it. And then the sirens. Helen, watching from the window, had called the police the moment the mob assembled. 2 patrol cars rolled up. An officer stepped out and took in the banner, the megaphone, the crowd, the woman now screaming incoherently at the center of it. Ma'am, the officer said to Alina, we've had a report of an unpermitted gathering and harassment at a place of business. I'm going to need you to come with us. Harassment? Alina's voice climbed to a register I'd never heard. I'm the victim. She pointed a shaking finger at me and found, for the first time in her life, that there were no words left that would work. Her legs gave out. A relative caught her before she hit the pavement. The officer, too. My statement, and Vanessa's, and Helen's footage from the window, and the recording, and the screenshots of the defamation post Alina had spread. He took the banner as evidence. The journalists had vanished entirely by then, their cameras packed, their nerve gone the instant the word lawsuit had entered the air. The relatives who'd come to back Alina up melted away from her one by one, suddenly very interested in being somewhere else, unwilling to be photographed standing beside the woman on the recording. By the time it was over, Alina Whitman, who had arrived with a mob, a megaphone, a banner, and cameras to broadcast my disgrace, was sitting alone on a curb, abandoned by the very people she'd brought, while a crowd of strangers filmed her. I stood very still in the middle of it all, and I felt no triumph and no rage. I felt the deep, level quiet of a woman who had stayed silent exactly as long as she needed to, and then told the truth, all at once, in the one place and the one moment where it could not be spun, buried, or undone. I had hushed, and then I had told. People always want to know what happened to them afterward, so let me tell you, one by one. Alina Whitman. The recording was real, and a forensic analyst confirmed it in exactly the afternoon Michael said it would take. That recording, her own voice, scripting a public humiliation and ordering a woman to fake a pregnancy to trap her son, became the centerpiece of everything that followed. She was charged with harassment and disorderly conduct for the workplace mob, and once Michael filed the defamation suit, the funneled $90,000 came under a harsh light it could not survive. To avoid worse, she returned every dollar of my parents' money, but the money was never the real punishment. The real punishment was the city she'd spent 30 years performing for. Alina Whitman had built her entire identity on being a pillar, the elegant, sacrificing widow, the devoted mother, the woman whose good opinion mattered. And the recording went everywhere. The video of her own voice on that sidewalk, played back to a crowd, ended up online, and her name became a punchline. The country club friends she'd lived to impress stopped returning her calls. They deleted their photos with her. The committees dropped her. The woman who could not bear to be seen as anything less than superior was now, permanently, the monster mother-in-law whose own son's wedding she'd sabotaged on tape. She'd spent her whole life terrified of being humiliated. In the end, she humiliated herself, in her own voice, in front of everyone. There is no karma cleaner than that. She tried once to come to me. Months later, after the dust had settled and the lawsuits had bled her reputation white, she called my office and asked, demanded, really, in that imperious way that no longer worked on anyone to see me. I agreed to one meeting in a public place with Michael present. She arrived looking a decade older than she had at the wedding, the lacquered composure gone, and she did the thing I never thought Alina Whitman capable of. She begged. Not for forgiveness. For damage control. You've made your point, she said. Call off your lawyer, tell people you exaggerated. Daniel's life is ruined, mine is ruined, what more do you want? And I looked at this woman who had tried to erase me, who had scripted my humiliation in front of 300 people and ordered another woman to fake a child to do it, and I felt nothing but a calm, clean finality. I don't want anything from you, Alina, I said. That was always the difference between us. You needed to take something from me to feel powerful. I just needed you to stop. And I stood up and left her sitting there, and I never saw her again. Daniel Whitman. Daniel lost everything, and the cruelest part is that he lost it slowly, watching, unable to stop any of it. His firm did not reinstate him. The suspension became a termination, quietly, the way these things happen. A man who brings a public scandal to a respectable company does not get the corner office back. The director title he'd climbed toward for 8 years was gone. The engagement to Vanessa evaporated the instant the pregnancy was exposed as a lie his mother had staged. The second condo he'd signed over to Alina for protection stayed signed over. She never gave it back. By the time the dust settled, Daniel had no job, no fiancé, no real assets of his own, and a mother whose name was now poison. He started drinking. He sent me long, rambling messages, apologies, then pleas, then bitter accusations, then apologies again, until I blocked the last number. The last I heard, he was living in a small rented place, working a job far below the one he'd lost, for someone else on someone else's terms. Which is, I think, the truest justice of all. Daniel spent his whole life letting other people decide who he was. Now he has exactly the life th. At produces. He was never strong enough to be a real villain. He was just weak enough to serve one. And weakness, in the end, costs everything it tries to avoid paying. I saw him one more time, by accident, almost a year later in a coffee shop near my new office. He'd lost weight. He had the gray, hollowed look of a man who'd been losing for a long time. He saw me, and for a second the old charm flickered up out of habit, and then it died, because we both knew it didn't work anymore. Kate, he said, you look really good. I said, I'm doing well, Daniel. He nodded, and his eyes went wet, and he said the truest thing he ever said to me. I should have stood up for you, just once. I keep thinking if I'd just stood up for you one time, none of it would have happened. And he was right. That was always all it would have taken, one moment of spine. But a man who can't find it in 4 years of being loved doesn't suddenly find it in a coffee shop. I told him I hoped he'd figure his life out, and I meant it. And then I picked up my coffee and walked out into the sun and didn't look back. There was nothing behind me I needed. Vanessa Cole. I told you Vanessa would get the complicated ending, and she did, because she earned it. She broke. At the right moment, in front of everyone, she chose the truth over the safety Alina had dangled, and that choice cost her the comfortable future she'd been promised and gave her nothing in return but a clean conscience and a fresh start. She wasn't charged with anything. She'd faked a pregnancy, which is contemptible, but she hadn't stolen, and she'd come forward when it counted. Before she left the city for good, she found me one last time. She tried to give me an envelope, the money Alina had paid her, $25,000 untouched. It's compensation, she said, for the trouble. I pushed it back across the table. Keep it. You'll need it to start over. I don't want her money, I want you to take responsibility for your own life from here, instead of living by someone else's script. She cried, she thanked me. And then she moved across the country, and last I heard, was building something small and honest, and entirely her own. I don't hate Vanessa. She wanted a shortcut and walked into a nightmare, and when the moment came, she chose to be brave instead of comfortable. That's worth something. That's worth a second chance. 3 people, 3 reckonings. Not one of them touched by my hand, only by the truth I'd been patient enough to gather and brave enough to finally tell. My parents got their $90,000 back, every cent. The day the wire cleared, my father called me, and he was quiet for a long moment, and then he said, "You know, sweetheart, I was so afraid you'd lose yourself in all of this. And instead, I think I just watched you find yourself." I had to put the phone down for a minute. I never married Daniel. Obviously. We never legally filed, so in the eyes of the law, there was no divorce to drag through, just a broken engagement and a clean, complete exit. I kept the demand, won the money, ended the defamation, and walked away owning my name again. And then I did the thing I do best. I rebuilt. I left the firm, not because of the scandal, but because the scandal showed me a company that had been ready to throw me to the wolves to protect its image, and a woman who's just learned what she's worth doesn't stay somewhere that doesn't know it. I took everything I knew about brand, about crisis, about reading a room and turning it, and within a year I was running marketing strategy at a far bigger company, for far more money, with a title that was actually mine. They hired me in part because someone on the hiring committee had quietly watched how I'd handled the entire public mess, calm, factual, devastating. "We need someone who doesn't panic," he told me in the interview. And from what I saw, you don't. 2 years after that, they made me a vice president. I stood up at a company-wide meeting and gave a presentation to 400 people without my hands shaking even once. And somewhere in the middle of it, I caught myself remembering another room, another microphone, another 400 faces, and I almost laughed. The girl who'd stood frozen on a wedding stage and the woman standing on that one were the same person. The difference was that I finally knew what I was holding. I bought my own place, just mine. No deed to argue over, no name but my own on the paper. A bright apartment with good light and a kitchen where I cook for the people I actually love. I hung my own art on the walls. I filled the shelves with my own books. My parents come for dinner on Sundays, and my mother, who cried so hard at that wedding, sits at my island and watches me move around my own kitchen with an expression I can only describe as relief. "You seem like yourself again," she said one evening. "More than yourself, actual. Why like the self you were always supposed to be?" And for the first time in years, the quiet in my home felt like peace instead of waiting. There's a man now. It took a long time, and that's the point. He's slow and kind and entirely unimpressed by spectacle. A man who, when I mentioned my mother once felt lonely, said, "That's hard. Have you called her?" And then went back to chopping vegetables and never once made me feel like loving my family was a competition he had to win. He has a good relationship with his own mother, an easy, warm, normal one, and the first time I watched them together, watched a grown man love his mother without disappearing into her, I understood the difference between devotion and a leash so completely, it almost made me cry into my wine. He reads the fine print of his own life. We're in no hurry. I spent 4 years rushing to keep a door open for a man who was already gone. I've learned to let things take exactly as long as they take. I keep one thing from that whole season of my life. Not the ring, I gave that back on the stage. Not the dress, I donated it to a charity that lends gowns to brides who can't afford them, and I hope it brought someone a better day than it brought me. I keep a copy of the recording, not because I need the reminder of what they did, because of what it taught me about what I am. I am a woman who waits. I am a woman who watches. I am a woman who, when she finally moves, moves all at once and not before. For 4 years, I was afraid that being quiet meant being small. It didn't. Quiet was just the part before I decided to speak. So I asked you at the beginning, and now I'm asking again because I want to know if your answer changed. A man humiliated his bride at their own wedding to please his mother. She ended it on the spot, then spent 6 weeks gathering the truth and laid it all bare in public. Was she too cold, or did they hand her every reason? Tell me in the comments. I read every single one. And if you've ever been underestimated by someone who mistook your patience for weakness, type "hush" below. Let's see how many of us are out there. This is Hush and Tell Stories, where we keep the secret, and then we tell it. If this one stayed with you, subscribe, because I've got another for you very soon. Until next time, stay quiet a little longer than they expect.